Hello and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, do make sure you go back and listen to the first few episodes. We had a lot of fun making them. And if you've been with us from the start, congratulations and welcome back. Once again, I'm joined by Chris Horn, Managing Director and founder of Guns on Pegs. Chris, how's it going?
I'm good, thanks, George. You can probably hear me now as well. How am I sounding?
I was going to say, it sounds less like you're phoning in from the 1970s this
Yeah.
time. You've got your fancy new microphone.
No, not that at all. I was just taking lockdown really seriously and I was in a deep hole. I'm out of that now. And I secretly have a fancy new microphone that was in the office all along. So, no, we're all good. And the sunny weather's come back. So, all good.
Excellent. And we have another special guest today. Chris, can you tell us who that is?
We do. This is a really exciting one. He'll hate me for saying that. But no, I'm really excited to have with us Tim Woodward, who many of you will know as the Chief Exec of the Country Food Trust. And of all days, this is an awesome day to have Tim with us because literally only a few hours ago, Tim announced that the Country Food Trust had delivered its 1 millionth meal to people in need. I'll let Tim explain more, but it's absolutely awesome to have you here today, Tim, and so exciting.
Yeah, welcome along, Tim.
Thanks very much indeed for having me on. That's absolutely fabulous. Thank you, George, and thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's been a quite a build-up. We started, our first meals were sent out in March 2016, and we sent 2,000 meals out to FareShare in Bristol, this amazing charity that distributes to other charities, and then to people in need. And yesterday, we delivered our 1 millionth meal. We just got confirmation today to the exact same place. So some serendipity there that the people that received it first have received the millionth meal. But it's been an amazing day, and we've been on social media all day. We've had the great fortune of the Duke of Cambridge helping us announce the millionth meal. So yeah, hell of a day.
That's really exciting stuff. And I think that means that in a change to your normal schedule, I think we should probably go straight on to what's that you're drinking. Tim, what have you got to drink and to celebrate the milestone?
Well, what I've got in front of me is a bottle of pink gin, which is kind of an unusual thing to drink, but there's a fantastic company called Pinkster have produced this just delicious raspberry gin. So they make it with locally grown raspberries. They only make it during the season, so there's periods of the year they can't make it. And it's just fantastic. I had a gin tasting with them the other day with Stephen Marsh, who runs the company, and we could barely stand up at the end, but very, very huge education for me on gin through the juniper, raspberry, and all the rest of it. So, and also about spanking mint.
Come again?
Go on. Tell me more.
So to get the oil out of the mint, you absolutely have to smack it between your hands rather than just drop it in. And the final one, Chris, was round ice cubes.
Go on.
Which melt considerably more slowly. So we have large round ice cubes, and those take forever to melt because there's no corners on them.
Is that one massive round ice cube, or is that just lots of small ones?
One massive round ice cube.
I've seen this.
Spherical.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, round. They're quite, you get these sort of silicon trays you fill up from the top, and then you sort of chuck them in, but they're brilliant. So we have been drinking far too much gin over the last couple of weeks. We've been sort of working during the day, drinking during the night, waking up and off we go. But the gin has been fantastic. And Pinkster have just been a huge supporter of the Country Food Trust as well. They've really helped us along, as you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember Stephen obviously supplied a few drinks at the game fair when the CFT was in its very early days. We were having a party one evening, so he's obviously been quite a big supporter.
That's right. That first game fair, we swapped food, which he had none of, for alcohol, which we had none of. So it was a country cattle and curry swap for gin.
That sounds like a very good deal.
That I like the idea that we're kicking off with a drink, as you say, George, to celebrate. I think raise a glass to Tim's achievements. So go on, George. What have you got for this week?
Well, in a similar vein, I have got a gin and tonic, which isn't terribly exciting. I can't even tell you what gin it is, but it's very nice.
That's a poor effort.
Well, it's because I'm a sophisticated sort of bloke, and it's in a decanter, and I can't remember what I put in the decanter. It was a while ago, so it could be anything. I think it's most likely boring old Bombay.
And when you say decanter, do you mean crystal decanter?
Of course.
Don't get me started on those. Having spent a lot of time reading about the impact of lead and the differences between lead and lead in game and all that rubbish. But crystal decanters, honestly, if you compare that to lead shot, we're onto something else. So anyway. moving swiftly on.
Chris, come on then, what have you got?
So I've moved away. So the last few times I've had beers and ciders. Today I have a King's and Tonic. And this is, for me, it's a bit of a drink of the future, even though it's a very old drink. So a lot of you will know King's Ginger, but a lot of people think of it as just sort of like a winter warmer, which is what it was originally made for. I think Berry Brothers made it for, they were the ones that created this drink for, I think it was Edward VII, riding out and early in the morning and as a winter warmer. But anyway, as a sort of, it's slightly heavier than a normal gin and tonic. So it's great when it's not like peak of the summer and it's lovely in the winter. And I think it's a bit of a drink of the future. So there you go, King's and Tonic.
That sounds really good. I have to try one of those. I think I've got some King's Ginger floating about somewhere.
Yeah, no, but not many people have tried it with tonic. So yeah, definitely encourage it.
Excellent. Well, as you say, I think it's a perfect opportunity to raise a glass virtually to Tim and the Country Food Trust. And Tim, this is probably a good moment for you to give us a little bit of the history and the backstory of the Country Food Trust and tell us how you've got to where you've got to today.
Sure, no, absolutely, will do. And thank you very much indeed. Chris obviously is one of our trustees, or not obviously, but I should tell people that he is. Chris was one of the first people that sort of came on the scene and will remember me going with some desperation, great, someone to help, and probably being on the phone with him every day. So when we started this off, back in, actually the first conversation was 2014, I was still working in the city, and Andrew Stone and Sebastian Green from Gloucestershire had came up with this idea and asked if I'd like to run it. It was a fairly lonely start as we tried to work out what to do, and we took many, many false turns, from delivering pheasants in the feather to people in need, obviously not a good idea, to being a processor ourselves, obviously not a good idea. A lot of these things being, if I was coming out of the city and working with the FSA and now the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, the last thing I really wanted to do was start working with the Food Standards Agency. So a lot of change in that period. And Chris came on in very early days. And as I said, if anybody at that time offered any help, they were sort of hooked into and never let go. And I think Chris has probably have a little bit more time off in current years, but the first few years were never let go of.
I think, I mean, look, you work harder than anyone else I know. I think that's sort of a known thing in our office, actually. If you ask anyone else, and honestly, this is such credit to you for this this milestone. Yeah, I love the conversations the early days. I think that's the sort of, for me, that was like the most fun aspect of just, what can we do? All the different ideas that have been thrown around, as you were saying, like to get to this point. And it's been really interesting, the growth, certainly this year. And coronavirus has definitely helped with that. But in terms of people's sort of appetite and realization that feeding people in need is obviously of such key importance. But the early days, all those conversations we had, God, thinking back on it now, like, can you imagine if we'd said, we'll be talking in May 2020 about feeding 1 million people? It's amazing.
No, I think that's right. I mean, to give you an idea, I was looking back over some of the original emails. We had this idea of turning up in a truck, collecting birds from a chute, putting them through sort of plucking them in the truck, putting them down a tube into a free. I mean, it was just insane. And actually, as you know what we do now, we have a third-party manufacturer. So we buy our meat from game dealers. That's really important to make sure that we have people looking after the game properly at the beginning of the cycle. We have a third-party manufacturer who makes the product for us. And in that way, the FSA is dealt with by other people, and we don't have to become experts in that. So really, we became much more virtual after a while. You remember, Chris, that we sort of started off with these ideas, and then we moved towards, we raise money, we buy meat, and we distribute through a huge number of charities, 1,800 in total, but really through about 4 or 5 main redistribution charities. People like Fair Share, the Felix Project, City Harvest, UK Harvest, and His Church, a new one that's in the news a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's where we changed to, and it's gone full steam ahead. But if I tell you, in the first year we delivered 20,000 meals, and yesterday we delivered 26,000 meals in one day.
Righty.
It'll give you some concept of how we've got more efficient, but also people have been incredibly generous through this current cycle. We were celebrating, or we don't really use the word celebration, as you'll understand, given what we're trying to do, but we had a meeting in January to say thank you to everyone who'd helped for 500,000, and we've done 500,000 in just over 2 months.
It's unreal, isn't it? And
That is incredible ramping up of things, really, and it's amazing how to see, and not just with the Country's Food Trust, but all sorts of other campaigns that have been running recently, how the general public have, and in particular, I suppose, the shooting community have really kind of rallied around. There's loads of examples of shooting brands, or countryside brands making PPE and all that sort of thing going on as well. And it's really encouraging to see that from our community in particular, don't you think?
I think what it is from our point of view is that actually, if you looked at the example of Captain Tom, everybody wanted to give to the NHS, and they just didn't quite know where to go with it. So he became a lightning rod for people's desire to help the NHS generally. And I think we have pretty much done the same thing. We've been on the scene for 5 years. We had a trustees meeting just before lockdown and said, we've got to do something here. The trustees were very quick off the mark. And Karen and I, there's only one other person who works for this charity apart from me. So we are incredibly tight in terms of numbers. But we have amazing trustees, ambassadors, and key supporters. But essentially, the two of us with a couple of other people, Sebastian Newell and Jamie Green, just went for it. And as the money came in, we spent it. And we put a new production run in, which our manufacturers managed to do within a month. And normally we need 2 or 3 months. The game dealers helped us get meat in place. Everybody wanted us to succeed on this. And it's been a phenomenal 6 weeks, frankly. But I think Karen and I, particularly, along with a number of other people, are fairly tired now.
yeah, you're going to need a rest shortly, aren't you?
We'll probably take the bank holiday on Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely deserved, and I'm looking forward to a sort of trustees regroup to plan the next sort of phase. But I think what's really interesting about certainly the social media coverage as well is, and it reminds me of the early days of Guns on Pegs in terms of people starting to go, oh look, I understand what these guys do now, and it's just the momentum, it's the real snowball effect, isn't it? And I think that's been emphasised certainly in the last couple of months.
I think that's right, Chris. And Guns on Pegs have been amazing. You've helped us, as you well know, but also we've had one of your first podcasters on, Tim Adams, who sort of came towards us and said, "Yep, give you a hand." And even though he's got a lot on his plate, just could not be more helpful at a time when he had quite a name, for having been at River Cottage. He was really able to publicise what we're doing and also advise us. As you know, he's got very strong advice. I mean, terrible drinking habits, but very strong advice.
It's worth picking up, isn't it? I think you've heard his selection. You heard his drink choice on the podcast, didn't you?
I think that was a moment of utter desperation. That was a massive appeal by Tim Adams for people to send booze in his direction. It was poor, it was pathetic, and I wasn't falling for it at all.
I enjoy talking about Tim without him having the right to respond. It's quite fun, isn't it?
So much more fun.
I feel like it's my duty at this point to say that Tim has actually started his own podcast of late. So he's obviously been inspired by Guns on Pegs. So
Oh, really?
do go and check that out as well. It's very interesting. So everybody go and have a listen to that. But also go and have a listen to the episode of our podcast with Tim Adams, in which he creates a drink called sheer desperation out of whatever he has lying around at home. And you should listen to it, even if it's only so that you don't repeat the mistakes that he's made.
Tim, I'm quite keen to obviously you've got a bit of a background in shooting, by association, obviously getting involved a bit. Tell me what aspect of shooting is it that really gets you going?
Well, I sort of came to shooting fairly late compared to a lot of people. I grew up abroad, so you didn't sort of wander around with a gun, or it was quite difficult to do so. So I sort of came to shooting around the age of 19 or 20. And for most of my early shooting was a very small beat one, shoot one shoots down in Dorset, where my parents lived, which was fabulous fun. But I think the thing I've always really enjoyed is I always enjoyed beating, and maybe it came from that. But when I met a couple of people through the city, when I worked in the city, who sort of owned grouse moors, and very kindly invited me up, I quite often sort of beat for a day and shot for a day. And for me, there is nothing like beating the long part of a drive on a grouse moor. I mean, first of all, these extraordinary gamekeepers who sort of amble and run through the heather and up and down the peat hags. I mean, it's a serious, serious bit of exercise. So I love that. But also that whole thing of moving those birds slowly, slowly forward. And then finally, when you look at the line and you can't see, this is quite a strange one. It really taught me quite a lot about shooting the other way around. The best shots you never see till you almost stumble into the butts. The worst shots are standing up way above. And you can see them
Yeah.
for miles away. The birds split and they go, nope, they all split over me again.
Go on, then. Name drop a couple while you're at it.
Well, I suppose I haven't shot on very many moors, but the moor that I shoot on is frequented by the Percy brothers, and I think there's a sort of name of a Percy sandwich between the Duke and Lord James. And I've certainly beat towards the Duke in a butt, and you never see him. You literally can't see where he is, apart from all the birds flying towards the space where he obviously isn't, and that is where he obviously is. So he's a phenomenal shot and well renowned. I'm singling him out and his brother out, but I'm sure there are plenty of other good shots, and certainly I've had my eye wiped on many occasions with my rather amateur effort.
It's really interesting what you say about beating. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who've grown up shooting will have been in a beating line long before they ever held a gun, and that's certainly true for myself. And I feel like it should be a rite of passage for guns of whatever age that they spend some time in the beating line, because I think if you turn up on a relatively large driven day and you get ferried around in a gun bus and you stand on the peg, shoot a few birds, have a big lunch and go home, it's very easy to not really know what it is that it takes to get those birds over the peg, and what a sort of almost a military scale operation it can be, particularly if you're bringing in lots of ground for partridges or, as you say, grouse. That it's not simply a question of thrashing your way through a wood and making as much noise as possible. There's a lot more to it than that, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of care. It's almost an art form, isn't it?
So while we're on the topic then of keepers that probably deserve a bit of praise, I think I'm sure you've got one or two from the grouse moors, Tim. On that exact point, it reminds me of Toby and Mary up at the Isle of Muck, who when you think about the effort that goes in, these guys, I've always found this just absolutely unbelievable. So it's a lovely island off the west coast of Scotland, and you'd be sitting at breakfast having just massive fry up after a probably quite heavy night the night before, and just as you're sort of finishing breakfast, they're already out the door off to sort of go and blank in the first drive. And by the time you've made it to your peg, Mary's up on the top of the hill bringing the birds around and all the rest of it, and it's just quite unbelievable the amount of effort that goes in, and especially in scenery and like an island off the west coast where it's just rugged and huge amount of ground to cover, just unbelievable. So no doubt you've got some people similar to that, Tim, from the grouse moors.
Well, I think there's a couple of things I'd say. I mean, the keepers on the moors are an extraordinary breed of people. I mean, Nick Wormsley, who looks after Weardale, is the most staggeringly interesting man. And one of the most joyous times I spent with him is I went up in April. I was travelling up to Scotland to do some work for the Country Food Trust, and I dropped in to see him. And he said, "Do you want to come and see the fledgling birds and the young birds out and the young grouse?" And he drove me around at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we saw the most phenomenal birds. We saw, grey hens with chicks. We saw curlews with chicks, like little pterodactyls. And, the keepers' love of their moors and knowledge of their moors is quite unbelievable, as well as the red grouse as well. But so there was that side of it, which is fascinating. The other side with him was once sitting up on the side of a drive and him explaining what was going to happen with the birds as the lines came in. He said, they'll lift, they'll go, they'll drop, they'll lift, they'll go. These ones will fly through. And it's like,
wow.
His knowledge and understanding after 30 odd years on that moor, for me, was just, I would rather be listening to him talking about what was going on in many ways than actually standing in the bus. Absolutely phenomenal.
That's such an experience, sitting on the side of a drive and watching it from up high and at a distance.
Yeah, absolutely. It was rather a misty day as well, so it was a really extraordinary experience. Because I think a lot of people who go and shoot, whether they're shooting lowland or upland, don't get a chance to sit with a keeper and understand it's really such an art. It's science with art, isn't it? Getting it right.
Yeah, definitely. George, who have you got? You must have someone in mind that springs to mind when talking like this.
Well, most of my shooting happens on the family farm shoot at home, and it's not what you would call a professional operation at all. And our team of beaters are vary from very enthusiastic and not terribly skilled to completely the other way around. But the thing that really strikes me, last season we had a couple of days in October when it was absolutely hosing it down, and we do shoot mostly partridges, so they're mostly out in the open, and it's a couple of really grim days, and just the level of dedication it takes to turn out when you could be sitting inside watching telly, watching Football Focus or something on a Saturday morning, to turn out in that weather and get absolutely soaked to the bone, walk miles, and potentially have the biggest covey of partridges go the wrong way,
Yeah.
which could mean that nothing goes over the guns at all where we are. It just takes a huge amount of dedication and passion and love for what's going on, love for being outdoors, for the whole event. And so I always want to credit those guys who allow me to get a bit of shooting every year.
So they allow the shooting itself, but your mates and everything else allows for the sort of raucous weekend. Well, as we like to call in the office now, a straightforward shooting weekend. After a certain someone made that line rather famous. On that point, then, Tim, last raucous / straightforward shooting weekend.
It's always a sort of a bit of a strange thing to me that people who shoot go out and meet the night before, do themselves incredible damage, and then go out for a rather expensive day with the most awful hangovers. But I remember one some time ago. We used to have a sort of roving syndicate down in the southwest. We went down and shot in this extraordinary shoot called Punnell, which is spelt Punk Knoll, down in Dorset, which is right near the sea. And we were there for a couple of days. And on the actual day we shot, the snow started coming down, and we all had fairly good hangovers. But the snow started coming down. It's the only time I've ever shot in heavy falling snow where those birds were being covered, even despite the warmth, were being covered. And at the end of that day, we couldn't get the cars out the very steep hill out towards Bridport. And we all ended up staying back there for one more time. And, if you've got a slight hangover lingering, another session on the booze really sorts it out, I
think. especially when it all hold up and you can't. Those are the best occasions, aren't they? When you can't get out, no one else has got any other plans. It's like, well, what do? We might as well just stand at the bar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, and we had our last day at home this year was sort of the youngsters' day. I think all the guns were under 35, with me being the old man of the bunch. And the shoot lunch finished at 11:30, which I thought, in the evening, I should point out. So I thought that was pretty good going. We had to resupply on wine a couple of times, raiding the cellar.
Ouch.
Yeah, it didn't feel great the next day.
Yeah, we have a mate of mine up in Norfolk. Very similar sort of scenario, actually. We we go out for a bit of a wild day. We've had some epic wild days, sort of 150 head walked up, various bits of flighting, early morning flight, evening flight. It's just absolutely amazing. But a whole bunch of mates, mostly young farmers back in the day. So you know what I mean by slightly different breed. And we go.
What are you saying about people from Norfolk, Chris? My mum's from Norfolk.
No, they actually most of the lads make their way up from Essex. They're all Essex young farmers, but it's the pub the night before, and it's always such a mistake, isn't it? Because that's always quite a late one, and then the alarm goes at 6 for like first light flight, and you just regret everything so quickly. But I suppose when you look back, it makes it, and it's part of the fun, isn't it? That you put yourself through that, but all worth it.
Yeah, and it sounds counterintuitive, but it slightly sharpens the mind as well. When you're aware that not all your senses are functioning quite as they should do, you do concentrate a bit harder.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I used to shoot with a friend. He was always the last at the bar every night. And the thing he always did was get himself dressed in his shooting gear before he went to bed. And so when you wanted to go wake him up in the morning, he'd be lying there fully clothed on top of his bed, ready to go. It was a rather odd sight. Gun clasp, sometimes even cartridge belt around his waist. And up he got and off he went.
In a total reverse of that, it reminds me of a scenario actually up at the Isle of Muck. We got up for the early morning flight, and we all standing out there, just literally just stuck whatever clothes on you could, got out, total dark, right on the foreshore. Geese and the ducks are coming in, and I was with a mate of mine who was just the other side of this sort of splash area. Actually, I'll name him. Shame him in this instance. A guy called Ed Delarue used to work for the Game Fair a few years ago, and he fell asleep during the flight with his dog on him like a duvet, just keeping him warm. And I was loosing off some goose cartridges, like full blown threes, quite not that far from him, and he still didn't wake up. We went back for breakfast, and we had to then fire a shot from the lodge over the foreshore to try and see if he could wake the dog up. Because when the dog woke up, it then moved him, and he woke up. But he was asleep on the foreshore for about half an hour. But that was after a busy night.
That's brilliant. Talking about the chap who slept in his shooting gear, it's not shooting related, but shout out to my mate Toby Clowes, who I play cricket with, who variously turns up to cricket matches either in his pajamas or in his dinner jacket, which I think shows fairly good dedication as well.
Excuses? I'm sure there's some excuses knocking around. I should have teed you up before to give you a bit of a heads up on those.
Was this excuses for bad shooting?
I mean, obviously, whilst you're on the subject of hangovers, I mean, that's a pretty good one. But there's what others come to mind?
No, I mean, I'm normally excusing my own shooting rather than listening to other people's excuses. I tend to go with the straightforward, I'm sorry, I'm just terrible at this. But it is extraordinary, isn't it, when you shoot, how you can have such a good drive and then you're sort of, everything builds up, you think, oh, I'm on it, and then be completely put in your place on the next drive. I've never really got used to that up and down of shooting. And you just as soon, or you can even have great days or even great weeks or months or something. But inevitably, there always comes that day when it doesn't quite work.
Absolutely. George, do you want to talk about the last day of the season for you?
Well, the last day of that one. Yeah, well, I had a couple of nice ones. I did have a fairly stinking hangover, it has to be said. This was at a place in Shropshire, wasn't it? Where the Guns on Pegs team and a few premium members went to go and do a bit of a video shoot, and that video will be coming out fairly soon. Keep an eye out for it. But yeah, we did have a bit of a big night in the pub the night before, and I wasn't feeling wonderful. And I was sharing a peg with Digby and Alex, and managed to put my drive off until the third one of the day, so I was feeling slightly better. And I did have a couple of nice birds there. I'm not sure what you're trying to say, Chris.
No, you did. No, it's just it was the vocals on the peg that I enjoy. The bang bang. The bang bang bugger, but then the awesome one out the edge.
Yeah, well, I can't repeat what I said after that.
No,
you did shoot well, in fairness.
One of the great joys actually at my age is I now have a son who shoots, and there's just nothing. He's a young chap. He's 18, but very rarely we get drawn together. And Chris, you and I were on a shoot last season where he came along, and I have to work very, very hard to wipe his eye. And he quite frequently wipes mine, but I'm merciless. If I ever get a chance of dropping one near him, I will always give it a go. But last time, on this particular shoot, I shot a bird in it, and he was a back gun, and it landed so close to him. And as it was coming towards him, I had that awful feeling that I was going to really do him damage. And he just looked at me and then shot the next three birds in front of me. So, but he's that. The wonderful thing about 18-year-olds is they don't need excuses because they have none of those hang-ups that we have. They haven't learnt the problem yet. They just point the gun, shoot, and off they go.
And get on with it, yeah.
Highly irritating.
You've got to teach them a lesson or two. That's pretty unacceptable.
Yeah, you do have to, but it's whether you can.
It reminds me of the time that my grandpa shot a cock pheasant and landed it on my dad's dog. And my dad was absolutely hopping mad. And for some reason, my grandpa, the dog was all right, by the way, but for some reason, my grandpa just found it quite funny. And I remember him turning around, just sort of flicking his V sign that he used to do, I mentioned before, at my dad, and dad literally just going spare at grandpa, who just thought it was absolutely brilliant. But the whole generational competition thing definitely comes out.
Because you were talking last time about having three generations, were you?
Yeah.
When you were the young.
Yeah.
That must be quite something. I never achieved that, but
yeah,
I imagine that's great fun.
Definitely, I'm going to try and make sure later in life that if I have a little one, that they make it out with dad and myself one day. Yeah, that was seriously fond memories from a few years back. That's actually sort of how we got going Guns on Pegs as a result of that, really. It was the fun that we had that just made us enjoy it so much that ended up falling into it.
Because there's something very special. If you're shooting with really close friends, I mean, we all shoot sometimes on days where you're invited, where you don't know everyone particularly well, but when you know really well, the amount of banter, the abuse, the deliberate poaching, the awful behaviour just makes days, I mean, absolutely cracking. Because quite often we all know the shot over your neighbour it is a better shot than the one in front, or a harder shot, and it's just great fun. So I love it when we're really close mates.
And if it's Tim Adams and it's front of him, then it's even better, isn't it?
That is a particularly loud shot, I think, isn't it? There's a rule in the book somewhere to allow you to do that.
Have you got any days in for next season, Tim? Is it? There's not a lot knocking around.
I don't actually, and I suppose I used to shoot quite a few days before this job. Strangely, everyone thought, they said to me, if you do this job, of course you'll be shooting a lot, and we don't feel sorry for you. You don't, and you don't for a number of reasons. We're sort of quite busy, a bit like you, I suppose. We're quite busy during the season, making sure it's all working, make sure our production's running okay. We normally run a winter appeal because we're sort of saying to people who shoot that you're out there probably overindulging, as we've been discussing, not just on the booze, but on the food. And at the same time you're doing that in the cold, people are really having a tough time. And we're not trying to make it miserable for people, but I think a lot of people who shoot accept that, they're in a fairly fortunate position when they're standing on a peg. So generally speaking, we're normally pretty busy. I think the other thing, as I said to you before, Chris, I have a rather badly behaved dog, and I'm very happy with my badly behaved dog to go out and sort of do some. I think picking up would be exaggerating what we do, but running around and sort of having a good time, and I love watching, so I watch a lot of shooting and do that. But I have the odd day.
Do you know what I think that you shouldn't be no one should ever be ashamed of a badly behaved gun dog. I think there's something beautiful about it. We used to have a border terrier who loved being in the beating line, and he would chase the first bird that got up out of the drive all the way to the line of guns. If it was shot, he'd run up to it, look at it, and kind of go, "So there." And then he'd turn around and run all the way back up to the beating line, birds going in every direction, and it was just a joy to behold. He absolutely loved it. He thought it was the best thing ever.
Don't you think a badly behaved dog works slightly better when it's the owner's badly behaved dog rather than the guests, though?
Yeah, when it's running into the drive with the corkscrew round its neck still.
Yes. And with that frantic calling going on behind the sort of gun or pick her up.
Like the old Fenton video in Richmond Park. Look, I think it's a good place to sort of revisit back to the start, really, and just and wrap things up. But I'm really keen. Obviously, we've got a trustees meeting coming up at the end of the month. But I'm really keen, Tim, to sort of hear about a little bit of a sort of a loose insight into vision for the future and sort of where things might go from here. Now that this sort of successes of the CFT is really, really picked up and the awareness is out there.
Yeah, I think it will come as no surprise to you that since lockdown, the population of people in food poverty, which was estimated at about 8 million, we haven't really got a handle on how much it's gone up. But if you're listening to the Trussell Trust, who do most of the food banks, they're talking about 80%. If you're talking to his church, that you're talking about 6 times.
Really?
Or the demand for any charity helping is huge. And of course, the NHS as well is being helped by a lot of people who are helping them with food, getting it into the COVID wards where people don't have time to come out, get out of their PPE. So there's a lot of demand on food. And of course, the other thing going backwards was we had the hoarding, which is a sort of natural behavior by people when they have food insecurity. And that took a lot of food out of the normal pipeline, which goes on to charities that help people in need. I always thought that slight feeling of food insecurity was kind of an interesting one. We probably all had it. It may not have just been loo roll, it may have been the food. And you think that for over 8 million, maybe 10, 12 million people now, that food insecurity feeling is an everyday thing. It's not because the food's not there. It's literally because they can't afford it. And, thousands of people are falling into that sort of no money trap. So for us, by the chairman, who you know well, Chris, and the founding trustee, both said, "Jolly well done. Off we go. 2 million, please." So we have a job to do, and I think the other thing we've started doing, because I think you've been mentioning about next season a bit, is that if a lot of shoots aren't shooting, and you've talked about the numbers, a number of shoots aren't shooting, then the number of pheasants and partridge are going to be noticeably less. There seems to be fairly good demand outside. So it may well be we have to look at other things. So, Chris, I was talking to you the other day about deer. We're talking about, certainly in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've been using whatever we can get our hands on to help people. because this is not a time for us to be sitting there and saying, we only do pheasant. There's not a lot of pheasant out there left in the fields.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that one unfolds, but I'm sure it's one of those things where there's a will, there's a way, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. But we have a lot of people. We have a lot of people in demand. We have a lot of people now helping us. Our reach on social media has grown, and I think the countryside community, and not just them, the broader community, have been incredibly supportive, and I think we have the capability to keep on helping those people who are in such desperate need.
Yeah, well, from George and myself and Guns on Pegs team, absolutely, and everyone, I suppose, just so well done to you, Karen, and the team and everyone that's helped along the way, and most of all, I suppose, to the donors who've enabled this target to be reached. Looking forward to the 2 million then.
Put myself under immediate pressure there. we will crack on, and we'll keep going. But thank you to you, Guns on Pegs. You've been extraordinary. I mean, a lot of it's getting knowledge out there because, as you know, the shooting fraternity is quite difficult to communicate with en masse. So your help getting out to them has been fantastic. So many thanks.
More to come. Good. Well, look. Thanks very much for coming on, and look forward to the meeting in a few weeks' time.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate that, thanks ever so much for joining us, Tim, and huge congratulations. For everybody listening, that just about wraps it up for this episode. We really hope you've enjoyed it and that you can share in our joy for what Tim has achieved and the rest of the Country Food Trust team. Thanks once again for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do let us know in the comments below. And if you have any thoughts on anything that we've talked about, do feel free to leave a comment as well. And if there's anything fun or interesting, we'll probably share it in the next episode. If you don't already, do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Game Card, for all the latest articles and content and shooting availability. You can do that at gunsonpegs.com, and you can give us a follow on Instagram at gunsonpegs or find us on Facebook. So until next time, thanks very much for listening again, and goodbye.